Hello and welcome to Upstage Downstage.
With me, Richard Platt, seated in the upper circle.
And me, Stephen Rees, seated in a cheap seat. This is the Theatre Podcast, where we discuss productions we've seen, things we've liked and may not have liked, giving our complete unprofessional and non-biased opinions.
So grab a brew, take a seat and let's raise that curtain. On today's episode, we'll be discussing Red Ellen. We saw this touring production at Nottingham Playhouse on the 30th of April 2022. This play by Caroline Bird tells the epic story of Ellen Wilkinson, Labour MP, getting its debut in 2022 at the Northern Stage, Newcastle upon Tyne. So Stephen, what's it all about?
Caught between revolutionary and parliamentary politics, Ellen fights with an unstoppable, reckless energy for a better world. Running into the likes of Einstein and Hemingway, she battles to save Jewish refugees in Nazi Germany, along with leading 200 workers in the Jarrow Crusade, marching from Newcastle to London.
So with all that said, let's
set the scene!
So Stephen, what was your first impressions of the set and the layout of Red Ellen?
Oh, God. What a complete waste of time. What a pile of donkey shit I have ever seen. But as for the set, I was a bit put off simply when we started. We didn't even have to get into the auditorium, and they had no booklets, and they had singers at the singing. I suppose I would have expected it to be period songs.
No, I think they tried to pick songs that were about empowering women, which was a good idea.
This play was basically historical, so therefore you ought to really have had period music of the time, or at least something. But they've gone on a spin for empowering, inspirational music in this choir.
Yeah. I mean, even if they'd have chosen songs that were predominantly sung by men in the 30s and 40s that were actually then sung by women, that would have had more of an impact as you walked in, just to create that take back of power to women, really.
I'm always a bit weary when they put like a choir on or something to entertain you in the foyer before you actually go into the auditorium, because I just think, have they done this because of the weakness of the actual show? Is it more throwing more stuff at it to get you in the mood?
Definitely.
You know, just to like butter you up.
Yeah, no, I get that. I think what was frustrating for me was we've not even got through the production yet, but at the interval, they sang the same songs. They didn't do a different set for the interval. It was exactly the same, those songs that they sang. So.
And the reason why I brought the actual choir up first is because that's the first thing it was part of the play, so it was the first thing we came into contact with. So when we did take to our seats and we saw the set, before they even started, the audience was still coming in at half past. So they had the actors still on stage. Well, they just came onto stage in, I suppose, in a little bit of darkness, muttering in character. And the set was basically, well, what was it? It was just a simple flat staging with a wooden oak-panelled walls, and there was three of them, one at the back and then a section on each side, about 2 meters high with 3 meters width each, with a gap in between, and then just a table with the Labour Party Daily Herald on a trestle table at the front with mic stands on. And that's where they were, but it was very much a lacklustre set, if I found.
Yeah, I mean, it showed a Labour Party conference from the era, so you could actually see that was the aim of the opening of the play. I think my perspective is when you walk in and see a choir and their attire, what they were wearing, had got no relevance to the production. It just felt disjointed, and it was a little bit bewildering because you didn't know if you had to wait outside and watch the choir before you went and sat down and took your seats. They also blocked up the area where you walked to get a drink, so it just made everybody channel. There was a lot of confusion on people's faces.
Oh, not just on mine then?
No, not at all. No, it wasn't just yours. You felt like you had to ask almost if you could sit down, which was it just felt a little bit strange.
It was awkward.
Yeah, and the fact there was no programmes available as well, I felt a little bit put out.
Sold out already,
because it's the final performance, and yes, I suppose, it was the last performance, but you'd expect them to hold at least some back, and we weren't there late, so there was time, they could have had some available, or even if they got an online version of the programme, it would have been handy.
But one thing to note, by the time the action started and we all took to our seats, when I say all, the audience were very few and far between. It was slightly empty. empty. I don't think they sold any tickets on the balcony or.
No, the balcony was closed, so they didn't even. I don't think they even attempted to sell tickets for upstairs.
This play was clearly for a specific target audience that was interested or knew about her to begin with. We went along simply because we were interested in seeing the life of this Labour MP, Ellen Wilkinson, and learn a bit about her and her triumphs.
Yeah, and it was also a
like
new piece of writing that, it was a way to maybe see what somebody can do with material that at a time when there's very few and far between recordings of somebody in that era. So, the new writing can fill the gaps.
As for the set, it was very unimaginative because as the play went along, the backdrop had to double up for many other scenes which was in the play, and it just became a little bit boring having to see the same wooden oak panelled walls all the way through. But to go against that, they started wheeling in a lot of props and stuff, which we'll talk about later, into it. So, Richard, with me giving a bit of an introduction.
That was an introduction.
Shall we say that was a trailer? That can be used as a trailer. You can see how I feel about this play. I'm going to ask you now, how do you feel the space was used?
I think there's one word that explains a lot of it, and it is chaotic.
Oh, I thought it had to be censored out.
Well, I was being polite.
Yeah, I'd agree. Chaotic and a bit of a mess. The more it went on, especially into Act 2, but whether that was to symbolise struggles in getting to where she needed to be and what she was fighting for, I don't know, but it just looked...
I mean, maybe it was a way to actually show how much is going off underneath the surface, that just shows how much chaos is going off in her life when actually she was got a front of controlled and purposeful. But I don't think that it translated very well to stage. I think it just looked very messy. It was almost like the ideas were there, but there was far too many tools used out of the toolbox when putting the production together.
Put it bluntly, it was a bloody shambles.
Yeah, it seemed total shambles.
My initial thoughts was it's a very small play in a very large stage. That's my initial impressions.
Yeah.
However, the more we got into the play, the more objects ended up thrusted onto the stage. Therefore, it became a very small play with lots of things added to it. It was just cluttered. It just ended up cluttering the stage full of stuff, which was probably used only once.
Yeah, and they didn't even take things back off into the wings that then would mean that each scene would be evident that is what's happening in that scene. It just felt like, yet again, we got more stuff on stage, and that's how it felt. It was stuff. It was just certain elements, like they made a scene for the cafe where in the first half they used really, they got tea trolleys with lights on them to show that there was a cafe, but then in the second half they just brought one of the tables on and didn't even use them again. So the continuity wasn't there.
Well, I thought it was a restaurant rather than a cafe, but they did have the titles of the scene headings of the script basically above the stage.
Yeah.
But on this particular part, which I thought was a restaurant, because Ellen came in to speak to Isabel and maybe one other, I can't remember now, but there was a waiter just polishing the cutlery on one side, and then there was somebody else faffing about on another table. But those two people didn't seem to do anything other than just stand on the stage.
They weren't acting as they worked in the cafe. They were just
repeating the same process.
Yeah,
there was it
did
was
feel
distracting.
Yeah, definitely, totally agree with that.
But I think what the writer was entailing was for picking out an element where the MP Ellen, I think famously, went into a restaurant or a cafe, and then they said women aren't allowed in here or something like that.
Yeah.
And she said, it's men only or something. And she says, I'm an MP, so I'm not a woman or a man, I'm an MP or something like that. So she gained access that way, I think. I'm waffling now. Now, what I'd say about the scene changes, and I'm going to say this now, every single scene change for me just seemed to have been a complete mess of how they did it.
Totally agree.
Every single one of them. I can't praise any particular scene change here. Everything was just ham-fisted in the execution of it. And I can't get my head around the direction, throughout, but there's one particular scene that stood out for me. She was being interviewed by Churchill and... Oh no, was it Churchill or was it someone else? I can't remember, but she was putting her tights on. And I thought, this is very odd. you're having an interview.
Yeah.
And you're putting your tights on, and I wondered, okay, so this is a setup, so there must be a reason why she's going to be wearing her stockings for later on. Well, it turned out the very next scene, the stockings are mentioned by Otto, her boyfriend, in the next scene.
But it was a completely irrelevant scene compared to the previous.
So therefore, why did she need to put them on? Why didn't she have them already on? And why would you, like, dress in one scene just for it to be referenced in the other?
Yeah, exactly.
What about being in the scene and directing the piece and what she's there to do?
Yeah, I mean,
it's like being out of sequence just for the sake of it. For you to be in the next scene, you need to be dressed up. So why don't you get dressed up in this scene whilst you're playing that out for it to be referenced in the next one? It was just a bloody oddball.
I think there was moments where the set changes just did not have any power or any. It sort of didn't make sense. And I know that the focus was meant to be on Ellen and her journey. So the focus was meant to be on her in the middle of the production, always doing the scene changes, the costume changes. But they just felt under rehearsed and very amateur.
It felt incompetent.
It felt incompetent, but also I've seen amateur productions do it better. And I think it was just the thought of they didn't make enough of those people doing the scene changes where they could have been part of the production, where when they changed set or moved things, I think the scene changes could have been rehearsed where they became part of the production, where
more,
they had
more slick, because I found that they were floundering around trying to get objects on stage, off stage. They were bumbling about like that. There was a scene where they turned the bed into a car for Ellen driving, and then they reversed it back up. Basically, these other cast members were pulling the bed whilst they were still on, and then during the blackout, we still saw the car because it had the headlights on. They stood up. She took the steering wheel and handed it to someone else. But whilst it went to the next scene, you could still see them drag the bed car. And
the headlights, because the headlights were still on.
Yeah, they didn't turn it off till a little bit later on.
But they could have pushed it behind the walls that were there, and then you wouldn't have even recognised that or registered it. It felt like it was a lacklustre scene change every time, where you were almost waiting for that to happen and know that. I think for me, scene changes, if you're in costume and you're doing the scene changes, which looks really good and it's always something that I like to see, you're still a character on stage. So make something of it. Make it part of why you're walking on stage, not just like you're a cleaner that's got to clean the stage for the next scene. It just felt like they didn't know the purpose, and the audience can see it. There was no blackouts in these scene changes. There wasn't even a brownout at certain times, so you're in full view. Make use of the fact that you're in full view. The only nod that I saw to what I'm talking about is one scene where they got intimate, they were having sex on the sofa, and two of the cast members held up a blanket that was referenced in that scene. And
that was in Act 2.
It was in Act 2 where they referenced the blanket. It was thrown on the floor, and the two cast members that were doing the scene change at that time just held it up to block off the intimate scene, and it looked good.
Yeah,
and that's what they should have done. The audience
reacted to that with a bit of a titter. Yeah. Now, why didn't they do that with a blanket in Act 1 when they were bonking on the bed?
Oh, but also, why didn't they do it with other things where they used the cast to walk out and hold a tray to be part of the furniture, but then in other scenes they threw those moments away? And I think
it was like all or nothing, wasn't it?
It was like
one moment they're going to make a cup of tea going into the kitchen, but then a stagehand came out with a tray of the kettle and stuff, and then next time they go to do it and it's not there.
It felt totally. I mean, Mrs. Overall does a better job. I mean, Mrs. Overall walks out. She did that. Honestly, Acorn Antiques has far more. It felt like we're watching Crossroads.
This does feel like everything went wrong. Did we actually go and buy tickets for the play that went wrong? And this is what we got.
This is what we got. Because and I think, I don't know. For me, it just felt.
Actually, it's funny you should say that, because you could actually see through the back of the actual wooden set when they opened some of the doors or the flaps or whatever you want to call it. So you did actually see the A-frame. So when you see some of the ensemble cast walk around the back in character, they do, I suppose, a bit of a walk, and then you see them like if they were hobbling, you'd see them, and then they'd stretch back up again then and start walking off like, you're still on set, we can still see you, but they've just changed from character to actor.
Yeah, and I think...
Like, oh, no one's looking at me because they can't see me. Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we can
really
still see you. We know
set.
you're there. And I think you also saw pieces of the set pieces waiting for the next part of the production or the next stage.
On or something.
And there was also a moment we're going to be talking heavily about set, because in the first half we did a set change and there was pieces of set falling over that weren't meant to be seen until later in the production.
What was that? Was it like
but it was a big tall, it looked like a hat stand or a stretcher or something, but it was the fact that should have been tied back until it's needed, so it doesn't fall over. But there was about 5 people trying to...
wasn't it, or something,
it could have been that, but there was about 5 or 6 people trying to tie it back to the wall or rest it back again. And it just was such a distraction that those... But we're talking...
How much of productions when they go on and they're just in rehearsal or whatever,
this...
it's really bad, and you think, okay, next week, we've got till next week to get it right before going on. This is a professional production.
This was the final night of the production, though.
And they still haven't got it right.
Still not there.
Slick.
So I do think it was very...
So forgive us for being really harsh on this one, because this is a professional production that just went to...
Yeah, I just think there was too many people involved who had ideas, and I don't know, I think it detracted from what could have been a good piece of theatre had it been edited and reflected upon what was happening on stage. I just feel like there was no work on the theatre craft when you actually sit there and watch the production.
Well, that's it, stagecraft. Was there any?
I don't think there was. I'll take that back. I think there was a lot of stagecraft, but too much. I think they threw every element of stagecraft at it, and that's the problem. There was no holding back on certain parts or just stepping back and going, this is looking like chaos to me.
I think we're veering into talking about the direction now, so we might as well go to town on that one. Sorry, not sorry.
Before we talk about the directing, shall we talk about the writing?
Shall we? Yes, I suppose we should.
Yeah, we need to, really.
New piece of writing by Caroline Bird, and I think she has written another play before, and she writes poetry. I found in the script there was quite a lot of poetic language, shall we say, poetic dialogue, which is, I found very reminiscent of Carla Lane.
Yeah, definitely.
Really. However, what got me was the structuring of the actual play with the trying to pull together a story, if that makes sense. Watching the play, it just felt like one complete linear long line of post-it notes where the scenes were coming into play.
Yeah.
It was a bit incoherent.
It was like a load of historical moments for Ellen, all in one, just in almost a muddle, but in an order. And that's how we'll do it.
When you're writing any play, you've got a beginning, middle, and an end, and then you've got the highs and the lows and the wants and the needs. And this is about Red Ellen, the MP. So I think where she's come from is talking about the history of her, bringing to attention who she was and what she did, but in a very haphazard and ham-fisted way, and talking about the character of Ellen, you've got the internal and external conflict that she has, but it's not written in a way where we see her explore those as the story progressed. It was very much, like I say, a post-it note of she did this in this scene, and then she did that in that scene, and then the next scene she did this, and then in the other scene she did that. Yeah, very historical.
And I think at the start...
But you need a story behind that. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? We had a backstory, which was one particular scene, but it didn't gel, it didn't...
No, and I think at the start you saw her almost public face in the opening of the production, where she's at the Labour Party conference, and you saw her be that public-facing, customer service-driven person that talks to a wider audience that maybe doesn't talk about personal life. And it just felt there was just such a disjointed way of writing where it didn't fill the gaps, and you were still left guessing as to what this person actually was like, because it seemed to come in and then disappear, and then come in and then disappear. And when I mean disappear, it just disappeared, and you didn't know where it was going.
Yeah, so there was like, you're saying like there was a setup but no payoff.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, there was a few moments like that where you just... I think you found facts out about her throughout the production, but there was
It
no
wasn't
real
realised.
heart.
Yeah, it wasn't realised.
almost.
Exactly. And I feel that, like I say, it was really good intentions of the writer to showcase this legendary character of who she was, but missed the mark massively for me. And it's a real letdown because I really wanted to find out more and just like this play for it being slightly powerful, like this positive woman who wanted to come in and do some good, going against the establishment and making real change. And she wrote with that in mind, but it just came in like a wrecking ball, just complete one thing after another, just 100 miles an hour with no like highs or lows of the characters.
But it also-
the wants and needs, she wants to do this, but she's stopped because of this. It was, I keep going back to it. I just saw like a snapshot of the writer's wall of just post-it notes of this scene's got to happen here and then that one.
But also, I felt like it was bullet points of her life, where it's like I've got to get all these bullet points
Well,
into
that's
the
what I'm
production.
saying. This is a post-it
and
notes.
and it's
That's
the
all it
same
was,
sort of
just
thing. It's like just
relayed
ticking
on
them off,
stage.
just ticking them off, just make sure we've done it. But also, there was times when, because we've listened to some and seen some footage of Ellen Wilkinson that this play is depicting, and I will share them in the links sent on the podcast when we send it out, and you can see there's a different woman there than was portrayed on stage. This woman was more personable and more forthcoming a lot of the time, and
exactly. Ellen, she came across as soft and genteel and endearing. You know, there's not a great deal of information or film reels out there, but what there is someone who's quite kind and probably listens, as well as fighting for the good fight.
But also clever in the way she used her language, because we heard a radio interview where she was very clever in retaliating to a journalist, and it was done with a bit of, she knew how to reply and respond, you know. And
I think this is another gripe of mine. It's historically a period piece set mostly between the 30s and the 40s up to the end of her life, and you only have to watch like Noel Coward plays or Pinter's or that of the era to see how they spoke and how eloquent they were. Even, you know, there's reels out there on YouTube about British Panthay or film.
Panthay,
those ones, Life of the Times.
Yeah, of course.
To actually get all kinds of social class and how they speak. And the dialogue, the writing just didn't match that. It was very contemporary with a load of buzzwords fitted in, you know, communism, fascism, and all the ilk like that. And even the comedy. She does write really good comedy. However, it was overrun with, it felt like inexperienced playwriting in terms of what was the point of this scene.
Exactly.
What the
Take
wants,
it
what
back
the
to
needs,
basics
where's
sometimes,
it going?
Yeah. But also, I think it was also the regard for what's happening in the next scene. Because it was very compartmentalised into each scene, it felt messy because you were like, oh, we're going here now. And just by projecting the words on the stage to tell you where we are next, I didn't think that was enough to tell you where you were going, because it felt like we just keep jumping. I felt like we just...
It's a token element, but a play cannot rely solely on information on the screen, because you shouldn't have anything. You shouldn't have that kind of technology.
Personally, you should be able to shut your eyes and know what's happening without all the other stuff, because you've almost got to imagine it and say, do the words stack up for themselves and hold the production on its own?
Yeah, I think it was overindulgent in its to excess on a lot of them. There's a couple of scenes which it got me feeling and gave me the impression that the writer had been watching Chris Chibnall's run of Doctor Who with Jodie Whittaker, because every time I was watching it I was thinking, this is the Doctor speaking. I was waiting for her to whip out the sonic screwdriver. Oh, I'm going to fix it. Here you are. Milk for the kids.
But also, there was also a moment where, like, the scene in the underground bunkers where Ellen was playing the MP for all the bunkers and the supporting all the people that were under there in the bomb shelters.
The bomb shelters.
The bomb shelters. It felt a little like there was references to Margaret Thatcher in there. And it just felt a little bit like this politician is being portrayed as somebody from a different party. And it just felt like, is that what the aim was? Or what was, you know, there's documents of stuff that there was happened in those days. And I just felt that was maybe misjudged. I don't know. I think there was a lot of creative license in this production where maybe used way too much, to be fair.
Yeah, well, I think I switched off. I'm not going to lie, I probably switched off with that bunker scene. I felt like I dozed off a bit and I woke up and I thought I was listening to Polly James be Belle from the Liver Birds on stage. That's what it sounded like. A little woman, cross between Liz Smith and Hilda Baker, running around on stage in a comedy moment. And that's what it felt like for a short period of time. And some of the scenes were there in excess. And this play desperately needs editing. I'm going to say that now, or at least a dramaturg sorting this out. Because this goes back to, or this links in with the direction of it. It had elements of Pinterest pauses, but it felt as if they didn't understand what the pauses meant. So they stopped speaking, and because it's not Pinterest at all, it was like, oh, have they forgot their line? What's this about? And then on one hand, they had a cup of tea, and we just watched someone make a cup of tea and pour it. No tea bag in it or anything like that.
No, there was no tea bag.
Just clear water.
But they were pouring clear water, and I think there was a bit of milk in it, to be fair. So it just didn't look anything like tea. So if you can't make the cup of tea, don't use water. Just use it without and let people fill that gap in.
Exactly. And let me just interject here. The first act was 60 minutes, 20-minute interval, and then it was it 80 minutes?
It was 80 minutes.
So an hour and 20 minutes, and it felt like 20 minutes was just watching someone make a cup of tea.
But also,
a lot of this stuff could have been edited.
But also, the interval was picked at the point where they needed to break the production because of the set that was coming for the second half.
Yes.
And it was almost made because of the scenes that had been created for the production, rather than it being an equal side. I mean, normally most productions have a longer first half and a shorter second, if they're going to go that route. But to have a longer second half,
it was a bore fest, an extra 20 minutes of boredom.
It could have been tightened up and edited well, because it got the makings of a good production.
At the heart and soul of it, it's got an idea, it's got the theme. Hell, even the poster looks spectacular. It really looks inviting, really looks good. This wasn't a play I was going to go and see, but because we went and saw it off the cuff, I can't help feeling a little let down.
I mean, I didn't go in with any idea of what I was going to see, and I think I was disappointed based on not the production and how it was and its audience. I think it was more the writing and the haphazardness of the production.
The reason why I didn't particularly have any interest, because I don't particularly like going down echo chambers, and I thought this is going to be left-wing echo chamber where they're just going to start banging on and on and on about the other side.
Just a very indulgent piece.
An indulgent piece of theatre that's politically charged again, and I can't be doing with it right now.
No.
And
however,
what I felt, however, seeing it, I felt so let down by the pace, by the directing, by the writing, a little bit of the performance, by the lighting, by the sound. Oh, sake, everything.
Yeah, I mean, if it was indulgent and good, I would have enjoyed it. And I think that's the thing.
What's annoying me more is there's a story there I want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
And it did not deliver.
It made me research certain parts of Ellen Wilkinson's life that I didn't know about, and I did read up on things.
But they say, why is it no one knows about her, but they know about Margaret Thatcher?
Exactly.
Well, a lot of people know about Margaret Thatcher because a lot of people are whinging on about her and attacking her right, left and centre. You know, even if she's done good or even if she's done bad, she was actually the first female Prime Minister. So of course she's going to be known. This just feels like victimhood, in all honesty. How she was written started off like she was a victim, instead of female empowering. Like, her social background, she came from nothing around Manchester. She was quite short because of nutrient deficiencies and quite a lot of
and her asthma.
And the asthma. Where was the story for her to defy every single thing to become so close into the House of Lords?
At the end of the day, the writing portrayed her as somebody that slept around and had multiple partners.
But also, they just indulged in that section of her life without focusing on the story. You need to have the story and then tell what happened.
There was no retrospective as to where she came from or what she did or how she became that person. And it felt...
Well, that's all in the character work and the story. You know, you showcase the story and then you show what happens and how it affects her to be the person she was. What we got was a load of scenes that showed what she did with no story.
No, exactly.
Yeah, there was no story. This was a history lesson.
There was definitely an end, and there was definitely a start. But
the end couldn't come bloody soon enough for me. I'm so angry that a play I didn't particularly want to go and see, and I sat through, And they've not done it justice.
No.
As much as they probably think they have on that side of the fence, they haven't.
No, I just think that
They made her out to be so hard done by.
Nobody's questioned the integrity of the script, and nobody's sat back, and this is where editing is so important, because this could be a piece of theatre that ran for a long time if they'd have got the writing right. I think as well, I mean, the cast, personally, the performance didn't help because we went to a captioned performance, and the captions didn't match. They didn't. You were reading the script on the captions, and they were missing lines. They were showing up the words, and you're thinking the captions don't match the words that they're saying. There was some cast members that were just missing ends of sentences, or there were certain moments that questions weren't being asked. They were just being flatly said, those words. It lost the intonations of the actual production.
Yeah, the play needed to be edited, really. So much. In fact, you could probably do away with an hour's worth and split the 80 minutes in half. But the thing is, it's like, did the director question the writer instead of just saying, oh, this is brilliant because this is what I believe in and this is all left wing and I'm all into that? You know, it's like they didn't want to offend anybody. The set and costume, why didn't anybody say to that person, and I'm not going to name and shame, this is wrong? Did they feel within the whole creative team that they didn't want to upset someone? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of almost felt like...
Because we had pretty much four directors here on this one, and not one of them got it right. You know, you've got the assistant director, intimacy director, the movement director. Why could the director not direct all those other two? Is it because the actual director is incompetent and cannot do that?
I think the whole point of a director is, as much as you want a collaboration with your creative, shall we say, for a piece of theatre, the director still has to pull rank and create one total joined up piece of theatre. And I think it was very evident that this was a production made of a collective of people rather than one voice. And I think that's so important when you're creating theatre. I've seen productions like this before where you think too many voices have got involved because it's messy. It's not conducive to an audience member to watch it and take it in and understand it. And I think that's the key thing. Sometimes you have to step back and sit there and go, that needs to go. And it may be, I mean, personally, I wonder if the director had their hands tied and they couldn't change the writing because Caroline wouldn't let them.
Maybe.
It may be that they would confined within that workspace, but if something isn't going to work, it's got to be changed, you know.
Yeah, you need to know that you've done wrong. You can't just be going around slapping people on the back saying, oh, well done, this is a brilliant piece of writing, I can't wait to do this, and just it up.
Well, exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
But even if
we're all starving here and no one wants to eat that bloody hot pot.
But I feel like even if there was previews, did they actually change anything from those previews? Did anybody actually be honest about the production? Because in new writing, you've got to do that because you make it more universally accepting to actually get this message out to more people.
And this is why I'm wondering, the people who reviewed it and people who were a part of it, are they biased? Are they biased because, oh, this is Red Ellen, this is about Labour, and, you know, they want to actually tell that story without thinking how it could be done better?
But has
is it
the
just this is the element that's great, so we're just going to go with it?
Has the story been told properly?
Well, we don't know. There's two sides to every thing.
Has the story been told in a way that I mean, I just don't think there was strength of message in the whole piece, really. You know, you basically... I don't know. I think it...
But talking about like editing it down, there's parts of the dialogue where in one particular scene that they're talking about something, and then he starts saying, "Oh, do you like my bow tie?"
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's the Doctor Who-esque. It's like a random thing, and then this person just randomly talks about something completely different just because it's fun.
It just felt distracting, and I think there was times...
felt like she'd definitely watched too much Doctor Who, for God's sake. But anyway, we need to move on to directing, as if this is all merged anyway. But to me, it's trying to be stylistic without knowing how to do it.
Yeah.
It felt inexperienced. I thought I was watching a student production. If it was a student production or an amateur one, I'd probably give it a little bit more leeway. But no, this is a proper production in a proper theatre with proper resources and a proper budget.
Exactly.
I would love to have that for me and my play. I would love to have that opportunity and to see this up Anyway, the direction, it's like what I was talking about, the pauses. Pinter pauses, Brechtian way of moving about or having that use of the stage.
Yeah.
So you had some actors who weren't in the scene, they just stood at the back with the backs to the audience because they weren't utilised.
Yeah.
But all the other on the stage was just left instead of taking them off. But they didn't always stick to that.
No, it felt like there was scene changes and things that had been directed in a way that, just leave that there because we need it again. Or leave that there because we need it again. But there was no definite decision on how it was going to be done. It was messy. It was almost like, had the director given in when the cast member had said, well, I can't move that and I can't do that and I can't do that. It was almost like, rather than finding another way around it to make it look slicker and cleaner, they'd not actually come up with an idea. So I do question the directing in that way, because was it left too much to, say, the movement director? Or was it left to everybody else on stage to do those things? It just became comedic.
There's too many chefs in the kitchen is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Too many utensils at hand.
Yeah.
Like you said,
there's too many tools in a box.
Trying to screw in a screw with a hammer.
Yeah, it felt like you was trying to drill a hole with a hammer.
But as a director, why didn't... I'm going back to the writing again, and I know we're trying to move on, but it was a messy show, which is making the review messy, because there's just everything.
Yeah.
Is just ham-fisted. But they had a telephone scene in Act 2 where Ellen was on the telephone to... Was it a sister or a mother, Annie? Sister. Okay. But her sister was actually on the set as well. Now, I didn't know she was phoning Annie. I thought she was just trying to get through to, I don't know, order a pizza or something. I don't know. She was on the phone, put it that way, but she was having a conversation with Annie. I thought they was in the same room. I didn't realise until afterwards that she was actually on the phone to Annie. Now, why do it that way? Why wasn't Annie had a phone on the other end of the stage so we could see that they were both on opposite ends of the line? That was a bit iffy for me.
Yeah.
And then you had the naming of the kettle scene.
Oh.
What random tribe was that? It never went anywhere. Like, we're talking about setup. It never went anywhere. What was the purpose of naming your kettle or naming your toaster? Oh. So, Richard, do you think this was well directed?
No.
No, me neither.
I just think it was done in too much of a collaborative way. I think that there was no solid decision on how the whole production would look.
For me, there wasn't a writer's voice, and there certainly wasn't a director's voice.
No, I felt like, had they been working together on the production, because when you do new writing, you've got to make allowances for how something looks on stage. You can't just say, here's my new piece of script, direct it. Because that writer, until they actually see it happen, how can they make that script a performance script rather than a piece of theatre that they think, well, if I've written it, it will work. And some things don't work.
No, you need to edit on the go.
You've got to have that element of editing. You've got to be open to that editing as well.
Yeah.
Because until you do that, you can't write for theatre just in a room and not look at a piece of... and not actually spend time watching it and go, actually, that just doesn't work. Or, I think they could have stripped out so much that would have made it so much sharper and so much... I felt like I was watching, I don't know, something in production that's like not even... I felt like, even though this was the last night, I felt like this was a preview.
Yeah, but the thing is, this play, as it is going to be published by Nick Hearn Books.
Yeah.
It needs bloody editing before it gets published.
I'm just speechless, to be fair. I don't think I can put into words. I just feel like it needs a lot more thought and a lot more depth in the production, to be fair.
Now, before we sum up, we do need to move on to our next segment. I know it's been a long one, but we're going to get there. So moving on now, you know what we're here for. I think we're...
here for the drama.
So, Richard, what did you feel about the performances? Was there any notable standout with the cast?
What I will say is Beatrice Jones as Ellen Wilkinson was always present, always on stage, always... She knew her script inside out, upside down. And regardless of the direction and the words...
Yeah, regardless of all that, I'd agree.
For me, she knew what she was doing. She knew she never left stage, so she was brilliant in her acting ability and how she performed.
She had a lot to do there. There was so much. It was like a one-woman show, really.
The focus was on Ellen at all times.
Yeah, so she had to be, and I forgive her for the awkward scene changes because she was always in the next scene.
Yeah, she was
always on it,
but she was always where she needed to be. She didn't misstep anything. I will say that I think it was just the chaos around her that led to us being so critical, I think, really.
And I would say maybe she was a little miscast simply because she looked younger than what the actual person was. However, that didn't stop her. But as much as she gave a really outstanding performance, I felt there was no emotional highs or lows. She didn't really take it to where it could have been, but was that down to the directing and the writing? Because you can only work with what you've got, and if it's not in the writing, then she probably couldn't have taken the actual character there. But I don't know if she, for me, gave that warmth to the character, that genteelness, that endearing personality which we saw on the clips of this character.
But also it felt there were certain elements that weren't showing her, Ellen Wilkinson, aging in a way. There was no costume moments where it's sort of...
I know what you're saying here, because basically the progression of age within this timepiece, because it was going from one extreme to the other, and wherever the character went, either in Russia when she was doing all the espionage with the spies and Otto and all this things, we never saw her age. Plus she's got ill health now. When it needed, she'd cough in a scene, but then that never always transferred to a next scene. Or when with her popping pills, that could have been brought in a bit earlier.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's how it's structured. It's down to the structure.
And I think that's where the writing and the direction comes in, where those moments needed to start earlier.
Yeah, to show the progression rather than it just being like a post-it note bullet point of a scene.
And I will say one of the other cast, I mean, Laura Evelyn, who played Isabel, I think that there was times where some of her delivery of speech and sort of her lines were done very, very flat, where there was no intonation in her voice or her language used. She got an accent. She was got a Scouse accent. However, there was just some moments where I think it didn't help with the closed captions. You could see what Laura was meant to be saying, and there was a lot of lines cut short. And it felt like, did she actually know the lines? And I think it was a little bit more obvious.
Here's a thought. If it was an entertaining piece of a production, you wouldn't be looking at the script.
No, I wouldn't be looking at the script on the wall because the closed captions were on.
Yeah.
But it was the things where there was question marks at the end of some of her statements, and she didn't ask the questions. They were just delivered very to the point.
I felt Beatrice did take on the role of Ellen, but saw her as this wrecking ball and just gone in at one kind of level.
Yeah.
Fast.
Yeah.
With no deviation or free will to do anything else. There's a lot more about this Ellen in terms of characterization, but it just felt a little bit one note for me.
Yeah, almost without the sort of personable approach that we've seen in the videos and things that we've seen. But
there was some really nice performances as well. Only a few weren't as good. And I'm trying to be polite because I could go to town here, and I really don't want to, because I don't want to offend people. I would say Sandy Batchelor, who was Otto, he was really good as well as Beatrice Jones, which were your two leads in a way.
Yeah, they were your main pieces in the theatre.
Play. They stood out more than the ensemble, the rest of them, because I think the others probably stood out for the wrong reasons on wrong sections or scenarios or scenes.
But also I think there was a few moments where it was probably more a direction decision than it was a cast decision, but certain scenes to give the illusion, say for example Churchill was there, he had his back to the audience, but then,
which could be a stylized piece of directing,
which was it had its clever moments, but however, you couldn't actually hear the character as well.
No.
Because he had his back to the audience and the microphones were in front of the stage, picking up his voice.
Yeah, but they mirrored that when Ellen was interviewing the character called David. I think it was, played by Jim Kitson. But he was talking about his shoes. because he had
Asbestosis.
asbestos. Yeah, so it was about going on marches. Now, whether that was a link of Ellen being interviewed by Churchill and then she was the one interviewing David, but with that, you ended up with Ellen interviewing David. You had awkward pauses again. So that was like a stylistic thing where they and I don't know if they just forgot the lines or what, but because you couldn't see Ellen, you had one person you were looking at, and it just felt like, have they lost the plot? Don't they know their lines?
Yeah,
what is going on?
Those times are when it shows that you were trying to really concentrate on this piece of theatre.
Yeah.
And you still felt lost.
Yeah. Now, what do you feel about the props? The cigarettes? I don't think this cast smoked. I don't think they know how to hold a cigarette.
No, I think although they used e-cigarettes to give the actual impression that they were smoking, I think they were used almost far too much, or they were used last minute, or forgot about them. We need to smoke something, or
it got to the point where one of them were like putting it down on the ashtray, then picking it up, and I've got to speak, so I've got to have a fag in my hand. It just looked awkward.
Yeah.
From knowing family members who smoke and being around work colleagues that smoke and a lot of smokers and seeing another production where they did actually smoke.
Yeah.
Viewing this, it just added to that unprofessionalism, amateurish.
It did feel
really awkward, and I don't like it when amateurs do this as well.
No,
and this is why it's really a sore.
I think
sore
also
thumb.
with props, there were moments with the props where they were used in different scenes, but awkwardly in a way. There was a scene with the hospital bed where Ellen got into a car accident, and then she ended up in a hospital bed. She was sat in the hospital bed, and then one of the other cast members used a cup from another scene that was on a table that had still been left out, but it just felt, because that table and that chair and that tea set were depicting a room scene, to pick up a teacup off there to use it in the hospital, it just didn't feel relevant. It just felt like, well, there's all this rubbish everywhere, let's just use that because it's there.
It was a chaotic mess.
Yeah.
Basically.
And then after the bed was used, it was just left invisible in front of the stage, but then never used again for the whole second half.
It was just abandoned at the back of the thing. Yeah, and talking about props, I think it was into Act 2 where Ellen, she had a particular scene which made her feel like the victim. And then you just felt, what's going to come next? And then what came next? Annie was wheeled out on a wheelchair. Ellen felt so hard done by, like she's a victim. And then you felt, oh, woe is me, pity on her. And then the wheeling in Annie in a wheelchair with an air canister basically attached to her. And then when you think, oh, okay, so another prop, another thing on set. And then after that, Annie's house was burning down. So they had this prop come down from the rafters, which was like a silhouetted doll's house, which was lit with a fire in it, just to show it was burning. And I thought, well, there's something else. So,
but you couldn't tell if that was meant to be Ellen's house, or it sort of depicted just a house, and
it was basically another one of those letters on the back of the stage that says Ellen's house is burning down, but in visual form.
Yeah.
Another scene. So her house was burning down. We saw that, and I thought, oh, another prop on stage. Now what's going to happen?
Yeah.
Oh, and what did happen? A load more models of buildings coming on set, they wheeled on, that were burning down. So then Ellen had to put a backpack on like the Ghostbusters and go fighting fire there. And then after that, what happened? Oh, a blimp came down from the rafters. That's where the budget went, on the blimp.
Yeah.
And then after that, just when you think there couldn't be anything else on the stage, cluttering up this in comes a hospital bed.
Yeah.
Gets wheeled in just for a scene. And then, like you say, get taken off and dumped on stage.
And then we moved on to a scene where Ellen found out she was just the second part of a relationship, just the second wheel in Herbert Morrison's relationship with her and his wife. When his wife was returning, she was just thrown on the scrap heap almost. And then there was a fight scene where they were throwing paper and rubbish at each other, and plates were being broken.
Oh, and he emptied the waste paper basket when she was saying, where's her wife and who's there for her?
And the stuff was being thrown everywhere. I mean, I did question the waste paper basket. There was nothing but paper in the waste paper basket, which normally you'd expect a bit of rubbish of other types within that, like packaging or things that they would have used in the house. But it just felt messy. And then what happened with all that? It just got left on stage. But also, one thing I'd like to say is the kettle. There was also a scene at that point where they made a pot of tea and they boiled the kettle on the stove. Fine, they used a cast member to be that kitchen unit holding a tray with the equipment. However, the cast member held the kettle over the stove to imitate the stove, and the sound effects came on where there was a whistling kettle. That kettle had no whistle in it. So how could it have whistled?
And we're talking about props here, and what I have forgot to mention, whilst they brought on the wheelchair, whilst they brought on the mic stand and the gas canister, and then the house burning down, and then the models, and then the blimp, and then the hospital bed, they also had a great big megaphone.
Yeah.
No, they didn't. They had a great big
gramophone.
They had a great big gramophone that they wheeled on in to play the music in Act 1, and then they utilised it as some kind of like foghorn in the second act, the alarms for sounding.
Yeah, the gramophone was on stage at the start for
and it never left, really.
Ellen's flat, that it was oversized. However, nothing else in that room was oversized. So it looked almost like you were in the Borrowers, where it was it was over-exaggerated. And I can see where they were trying to go with it, where it was a megaphone. It was a piece of, like, almost like the propaganda sort of posters, where you've got a call to action using a big speaker. But then when it kept being dragged around stage, it just felt wasted.
But there were moments the actors went to it to do something that had nothing to do with that particular scene, and then they walked back from it.
Yeah.
They wasn't getting a drink. It wasn't a drinks cabinet.
No.
They weren't doing it. It wasn't even turned on for music. It was an awkward thing where they just went there and came back again.
And the only thing that I really liked it being used for was the air raid shelter part, where they were actually moving it round like it was the air raid siren, which had a purpose. But other than that, it didn't really have any purpose.
Which brings me back to my first statement. I think it was my first one when I said this felt like a small play on a very large stage.
Yeah.
And the reason why it had to be a large stage is because of all the that they put on it. Everything was just humongous. Why did they need a blimp? Why did they need a huge gramophone?
I think that also
it's like
what we're trying to say
overcompensating.
is the props got to a point where after the waste paper basket was tipped everywhere, after the plates were smashed and everywhere, after the blimp had appeared, towards the end of the production, nothing was moved off stage again. So you'd got these model buildings kicking around stage. You'd got all this stuff on stage that basically it made you feel like
it was chaos.
It was just chaos, but beyond having a reason. It was chaos without any form of reason, and it just felt like...
But sometimes they were taking stuff off,
yeah,
and sometimes they left it on.
Yeah, and then but also sometimes they attempted to clear some stuff, but not everything. It felt like it didn't even have a purpose. And also, there was one other scene where there was a paper mache head of Red Ellen.
I forgot all about that.
And I've seen Billy Elliot on stage, and it was just the same, or it felt very similar to the Merry Christmas Margaret Thatcher moment, where there's almost a spitting image head appears, and it just felt like such a moment that didn't make any sense.
What was it? What was the point there? What was the idea behind that? Was it the opposition pointing fun?
Yeah, it was almost like trying to do the sort of reverse propaganda.
Yeah.
It was that sort of moment, and because it came out of nowhere, it didn't have the power it needed. It was just
another piece of on the stage.
Yeah.
They should have saved all that budget from the blimp, from everything else that was overly used, and hired a dramaturg, an editor.
It was almost like a moment where they were trying to show a flip side moment like George Orwell's 1984, where you see how the propaganda machine works and what even if somebody's good or they just churn you through the mill and put you out the other side and they make fun of you or use you as part of that poster campaign. But because there was so much chaos, it just felt like a messy moment on stage, and it was like it felt thrown away where they could have made more of it.
Maybe it was symbolism. as to what they were trying to say, that the country's a mess. She's there to tidy it up. That's why the stage is a mess.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like I'm searching for a reason
I
of
think
why
it was
it was
trying to
done
be
the way
done
it
in
was.
an ironic way and sort of show the irony of what she was trying to do and make fun of it. And
it just looked unprofessional. So, unfortunately, moving on to our final segment.
What the heck is this?
So, Richard, I know you started off by asking me about the set layout, and I've sort of gone back into my driving seat here. I'm going to ask you, what did you think about the tech and the sound, the lighting, the sound effects before we finish up with our ratings?
Lighting wise, it was done well in the overall general cover of the production, but I do think there was moments that could have been done better, and there was a big light hanging from stage that seemed to have a mind of its own and became a cast member on its own, because there was certain points where they may have swung this light that was like a big factory light almost that you'd see in an industrial building.
Yeah.
And there were certain moments where I don't know if they were swinging it from side to side to show
it was in
that
Act
they were
1 and
underground.
Act 2 that I noticed it. But it kept swinging in the next scene.
Well, because they'd swung it so wide, it was like a pendulum. It just kept going.
There we
kept
go.
going.
Kept going like a wrecking ball.
And because the lights were full up on stage, all you could see was this motion of something going forward and back and forward and back. And it was almost like, look, over there, there's a giraffe. You know, it was like sort of, there's something moving.
When they were looking through the window, this apparent window, which was basically an open flat in the wood, basically, I don't know how to describe it. They could have had a light reflecting inwards.
Yes.
So we had some depth
of course.
The exterior world coming in to the stage, and all these other nuanced lighting bits, like when they got in because they were going to have sex or whatever in this intimate area. You know, they had the lamp there for this bedroom, but it took them a while before they actually turned it on.
Yeah.
So if they walked into that room, why didn't they turn a light on?
You know, for me, those shadows are important, and those light leaks are important to show that that's the building they're in.
Well, actually, when you're on about the shadows, for example, because they were having this intimate scene, right? This is what, 1930s, 1940s, the kind of character she was, and the age she was in her 40s, 50s, that era or age range. They made this sex scene seem hilarious and something out of like Sex and the City. Now, it could have been done a whole lot better had they have had a blanket over them, like a sheet over them, like they repeated in the second act, but silhouetted.
Yeah.
And less done for laughs and less done as if it's out of character. Like, would she have behaved this way like a freak in the sheets?
Yeah,
maybe she would, but it was a bit. It seemed out of character.
It didn't lend itself to the rest of the character's performance. And
I mean, she might have been promiscuous, but
she might have been, but I don't think it.
I saw Samantha Jones.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah, definitely.
On that particular,
those sort of scenes wouldn't have been. They were a bit more gentlemanly or very more. Well, shall we say more missionary? You know, there was more. You know, there probably wasn't as much free loving. It wasn't the 60s.
Well, maybe if she was getting a freak on, I just think it should have been done more in character to the character we see.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
I think this is where creative license came in, where maybe it was done modern day when actually this wasn't actually the. It
just took you away from the actual story. This was more of a scene, which was like an idealized scene of how it would have been done in today's standards, whereas I think it just falls down to character.
Yeah, it does. One of the things I'd say is I liked there was moments where they liked when they lit the buildings up for the fire scene. So the small models had lights in that were automatic, so when they brought them out, they were automatically controlled. If they'd used that technology for the headlights in the car, then it would have looked even more slick, because if you go to the effort of having buildings that light up automatically and then the headlights stay on and those moments happen, make it all happen right. I mean,
they should have had if they'd have seen Animal Farm, which was directed by Robert Ilk, they did that seamlessly. It was just perfection the way they did that. It was a complete blackout and everything was lit up. The models, the lights for the Land Rover, everything was just spot on. It was just on point all the time with the beats. The way they did this, even though they had lights in the models which looked like the house were burning down, it wasn't in a complete blackout.
No.
So you could still see the on the rest of the stage.
You could also see the wheels on the bottom of the buildings, and I think also I felt like the lighting. The moments that I didn't like were where there was almost like dreamlike sequences that yet again didn't feel relevant to the production. We had coloured lights flying about and things that it's like we'd used too many toys in the toy box. There was loads of things that they wanted to do, and it's like they'd seen too many other productions to create this show, and it felt flat. I mean, sound effect wise, it was good. I think they were okay. The sounds and the things they chose were right for the piece.
There was a moment where Ellen was in the House of Lords and you've got like the mutterings of the other MPs, but it just seemed like it was like stock sound bites.
Yeah,
it seemed like it wasn't what they
like
could have done.
BBC sounds 3. And
yeah,
BBC
just
sound
mutterings
4.
of people like chuntering in a cafe. It didn't seem like when she spoke, what they should have done is have a raucous of MPs sounding from the opposite side of where she was sitting, so it was coming from the opposition. Like they were muttering about what she said, firing her up. But it wasn't. It just seemed extremely flat, like they've only just done a half attempt at filling a bit of extra sound there for the other MPs instead of actually thinking in detail who would be chuntering or who would be offended by what she's saying, who would be wanting to counteract that. Where is it coming from? If she's standing on the stage right, then ideally the MPs that are chuntering and not agreeing with her should be coming from probably stage left.
Yeah. Exactly.
From the Conservative side.
Yeah.
But again, it's like that little attention to detail was completely lost on this production. Now for our ratings, as we say,
call this a show.
So Richard, final thoughts to sum up what you thought of Red Ellen.
Well, I've seen it, and
I don't want to see it again.
I've seen it, and I wouldn't say I'd want to see it again unless it was heavily edited and a lot of work was put in. And I'm here for new writing. I've seen a lot of things that are new writing, and I just feel that they just needed to step back and look at the piece as a whole and edit for an audience, because I think it was too indulgent.
I feel like more attention is needed to the script. Yeah. Before going into production, before doing anything else, edit it. Edit it like you have never edited anything in your life.
And be honest with yourself when you're writing the piece, almost.
Yeah. This sounds like we're actually talking to the author now. But it's just one of them things where I feel this show needs to benefit from going back to basics. What's the story you're saying? Focus on the story. Focus on the character. And then fill in, just pepper it with her life. But make sure that you concentrate on the character and the woman, Ellen Wilkinson, before shoving in her life and portraying that, because it was just an incoherent mess.
And I've said it before and I'll say it again. Focus on the journey.
Oh, the journey. Well, it wasn't one.
There wasn't one.
So, yeah, for me, I was intrigued once I was in there, but then it was just a complete landslide downwards, I'm afraid. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being a bag of damp parsnips and 10 being fantastic, what are you going to score this, Richard? Be honest.
I'll give it a 3 because they tried.
I'm going to be honest and give it 2. 1 goes for the efforts of the actors, and that's distributed between all of them. And the second point goes towards the lady, the usherette outside, who I had a really lovely chat to, who told me that there wasn't any programmes, but I could steal the poster. I was more engaged with that lady there and had more of a fun time. So this show gets 1 extra point for the usherette.
Okay.
But what I probably would have said as well is they get 1 point for the actors and all of them. And I probably would have done an extra point for Otto Sandy, simply because he was quite attractive. And that gets the extra point, but because you've done 3, I'm going to have to just do 2, because we can't match again. So, what sound effect will you be choosing from the following? A complete train wreck? Tumbleweed? An audible shrug of the shoulders? A slow clap? A pleasant applause? Or a standing ovation? What will it be? What's it going to be?
Well, there's only one button I can press here, and it's going to have to be the train wreck.
Oh!
I've gone there.
Harsh. But do you know what? And I hate the fact that I have to sound as if I'm copying you. I'm pressing 2 buttons.
Oh.
I'm pressing 1 because the production as a whole was a train wreck, so I'm pressing that one. And my second is for the plot.
Okay.
Tumbleweed all the way. What the actual...
You're just greedy.
Bleep me. You know I make sense. And on that bombshell, that's the end of our review for Red Ellen. So there we are. That's our discussion of Red Ellen. We hope you found it insightful.
If not, entertaining.
Coming up over the next few episodes, we will be discussing the new production of Ladies of Letters,
Cluedo,
and The Homecoming. That's it for this week, folks.
If you'd like to drop us a message, please email us at upstagedowstagepod@gmail.com. Remember, you can always join in the chat to share with us your views on a production.
Also, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel so you get every episode the second it's released. And we hope you join us again for another instalment of Upstage Downstage.